So La Leyenda, Ilia Topuria just went on the PBD podcast and just dropped some major clues in this episode. And I'm going on social media and I see all sorts of people talking about what Ilia said about trying to sub Islam Makahchev and all these different things, right? And that is very entertaining. We'll get to that clip as well. But I want to cover some dimes that Ilia dropped in this podcast, which, by the way, this was an outstanding episode. I'll go ahead and link it down below, so if you want to check out the full thing, there you go. But I want us to focus on some of the very key details about Ilia Topuria and his move up to lightweight, because there's somebody in the MMA world named Brendan Schaub who actually had a take that the more I hear it, this was about 10 days ago that this episode dropped from Brendan Schaub. We're going to listen to about a minute or two of this, to where Brendan gives his take on why Ilia Topuria is moving to lightweight. And he gives a very, very, very good explanation as to why Ilia would do such a thing. And when you hear this from Brendan Schaub, if you haven't heard it, I'm sure a lot of people might not have heard this. This is one of the best takes Brendan Schaub has had. And this is a very detailed take, and it really makes a lot of sense. Then we're going to go back to the podcast and take a listen to Ilia Topuria and his plans moving forward. But I wanted you to hear this from Brendan, because this will all add up and it all makes sense. So let's uncover all this, man, and let's hop into what Brendan had to say about this, because I think he might be right.
On Topuria, you know, like Islam Makahchev said he wouldn't, or Islam Makhachev's team said he would not give him a chance at the belt. So Topuria says that he dropped the title because the UFC promised him that he would get a title shot.
Yeah, I told you guys this. Remember?
I don't, yeah.
If you think Topuria is leaving 145 to go up to 55 and lose out on pay-per-view points, you're dumb. There's no way. He was called the UFC, was like, hey, I'm thinking about dropping out. And they're like, all right, if you do, you can take a significant pay cut and you're going to be fighting bigger, stronger guys, and you're not going to fight for a title. There's no way he'd be like, oh, I'll just keep cutting weight and making more money.
So what Schaub is saying here, man, like this to me, what you're going to hear Ilia say, it almost backs up what Brendan Schaub is saying right here. And I know when Ilia Topuria was talking about moving up and there was all this talk of, look, Islam already gave 2 opportunities to Volk and he can't keep fighting 45ers, and Ilia, you know, he needs to go up to 55, he needs to get a win, and we know all about the back and forth stuff that's been going on with this. But what Brendan is saying, man, I think he's right on the money here, because of the fact that Ilia Topuria, which on the PBD podcast, they were talking about in the beginning of the episode, the pay and how things have just went like this for Ilia Topuria since coming into the UFC. And this seems to be on the money to me, man, because why would he essentially vacate the title, lose out on the pay-per-view points and all those things? And I know he's a huge name now in the UFC, you know, they can adjust some things and this and that now that he brings more value to the company. But that's a big detail, to just basically vacate the title and miss out on those pay-per-view point opportunities. Like, so what Brendan's saying here is great, and let's let him finish here, and then we'll go to the Ilia interview. But I wanted you to see this because, one, to give Brendan his due. You know, I like Brendan Schaub, and, you know, people don't always give him his credit, right? So I thought that this was a very good take by Brendan. Then we'll hear what Ilia's got to say.
There's no way. There's no way his team would allow him to do that. It's the fight business. It's prize fighting. Guarantee you the UFC was like, all right, if you go up, we guarantee you a title shot. Now, Makhachev can say whatever he wants. He doesn't call the shots. I know he's the champ. It doesn't matter. Makhachev's going up to, if Makhachev refuses to fight Topuria, that means Makhachev's just going up to 170. But Topuria's fight is going to be for the belt. Whether Makhachev goes up, so it's for the vacant belt. But either way, he's either fighting Makhachev for the belt or he's fighting for the vacant belt.
Boom. So that gives us basically a couple of options that Ilia Topuria is essentially going to lay out in the video. So we're connecting the dots here, man. We're connecting the dots. We'll go over that in just a minute. But this is interesting, man. This is interesting stuff because we really haven't seen someone. We saw McGregor back in the day do this. This is kind of the blueprint, I guess, to elevate yourself. But it's very interesting when you have a guy in Topuria who wins the title against Volkanovski, KOs him, goes out there as the first guy to KO Max Holloway, does that to him, and now he vacates the title and moves up. And it's kind of strange because it's like, well, aren't you going to defend the title a few more times? But there's obviously something that the UFC is telling him behind the scenes, in my opinion, that would make him do this. So let's finish this, though.
Period. There's no way he would just leave 45 and abandon the pay-per-view points, which are impossible to get, and take a huge, you're talking 7-figure pay cut just to go up to 55. Not possible. He's not that dumb.
So, okay, so that was, I wanted to show that because I wanted to give Brendan kind of his due there, man. Brendan's always been a cool dude, to me at least. So, and again, Brendan's had some good takes, man. Everyone just kind of shits all over Schaub. He's had some good takes, right? When he told Tom Aspinall, you got to turn up the trash talk a little bit to get the Jones fight, and that take by Schaub there, he's usually got some good insight. Having been a former UFC guy, he understands the business model and these different things, right? And he's plugged in with Rogan and all these guys. That was interesting when Schaub said that. Now, that was about 10 days ago when that episode from Schaub, I think it was about 10 days ago. I'll link that down below as well, when that dropped. This is what gets so interesting here from Ilia, because everyone's talking about, what he said about Islam and, subbing him and all these. We'll listen to that. But Ilia is going to give out these details that back up what Schaub is basically saying here, but ultimately tell us what the plans are for him moving forward, which is essentially that if Islam Makahchev is not next, then I assume that Ilia Topuria will be fighting Charles Oliveira for the interim lightweight title or possibly the vacant lightweight title. Now, obviously, that's just my kind of assumption there and going off of what we're going to hear here. But yes, there's the chance that it could just be a number one contender fight to fight Islam. But I think behind the scenes, the UFC has known that Islam has been campaigning for the double champ opportunity, which he absolutely has earned the right to do. He absolutely should get to do that. He gave Volkanovski 2 chances to become double champ. Where's Islam's opportunity, right? So if he wants to move up and do that, we've heard what he said, or what's been said basically, that if Jack Della Maddalena wins at UFC 315, which I don't think he's going to, but if he did, that Islam would move up and fight JDM. Now, the interesting thing becomes, what if Bilal wins, right? We know that there's a good relationship there between Bilal and Islam and Team Khabib, but it's going to be interesting to see kind of how that plays out and how that unfolds. Could this be the UFC saying, look, we're going to wait and see how this plays out at UFC 315, and if Islam decides to move up, we do you versus Charles for the vacant lightweight title, or if Islam decides to stay, we could do the massive blockbuster fight, which I have been saying is the biggest fight inside the organization at present. Let's get into this and take a look at a couple different clips here.
So right now, with where you're at, are you wanting your next to be that?
I'm sure that that's going to happen. I'm fighting for the belt.
Okay. So right now, you gave the belt back at 140.
I gave it because I didn't want to hold the division.
Right.
This is what I did. I could hold it for a year and a half, but I didn't because at the end, I knew it that I wouldn't fight again in 145, but I could have the position where I would say, like, listen, I'm holding the belt till you give me the chance to fight for the next weight class belt. But I'm vacating the belt because they gave me their word. That was all. Easy.
So they gave him his word. Or they gave Ilia their word. So what does that kind of mean? Well, isn't that kind of what Schaub was basically talking about? That behind the scenes, for Ilia to give up the pay-per-view points. Yes, he's a big name, and I'm sure, they're going to work some things out financially and all those different things, right? We know the UFC, they like to keep things behind closed doors and work these different things out. But it seems to me like they said, look, man, they're trying to prepare these different things to where if Islam moves up, they have Ilia, a massive star coming to the lightweight division that can take on Charles Oliveira, which is also a massive fight. Not as big as Islam and Ilia, which, like I said, that's the biggest fight in the organization. But I think the UFC is trying to cover all of its angles here. And I do believe that they want the Islam versus Ilia fight. But I also think there's that side of them to where they're like, look, featherweight's got some names. But up at 155, we have some names. But we want some new life instead of these OGs that have been around like Oliveira, Poirier, Gaethje. We need that new guy that can just kind of take over if Islam moves up to 170 pounds, which it sounds like that could potentially be happening. But that is an interesting detail there by Ilia Topuria. So it sounds like he's been told something behind the scenes that whatever he does next has something to do with a championship belt at 155.
Who is the ranking right now at 155?
Okay, so they're going to go over the rankings here. So let's go ahead to 1542. where he's going to talk about for the belt next. Kind of what I was saying, and it sounds like that is what the UFC is saying. Of course, sure, if Islam is like, okay, I'm staying at 55, Ilia needs to fight a contender, is there the chance that he fights Charles Oliveira and it's just a contender fight? Sure, but he's going to say something in a little bit here that kind of makes me think, maybe there's going to be a vacant title or an interim title or something like that involved based off of some of the different things that Ilia says here. And again, Ilia's dripping with confidence, man. And a lot of people, they're going to shit on him and say how annoying and this and that. I like when we have a guy that is confident, that is bringing eyeballs and bringing attention to the sport. It's something that a lot of people are complaining that we're missing, and now we have a guy like Ilia out here drawing eyeballs, saying crazy things to get people intrigued. He's a budding star in the UFC, man. I think he already is a big star, and he has the chance to catapult himself into superstardom. So let's hear what he has to say here, though.
Number 2.
So would you fight an Arman before you go? Like, let's just say Dana says, I want you to fight Arman before you fight Islam. Would you entertain that?
He wouldn't tell me that.
He wouldn't tell you that?
No.
He wouldn't tell him that. So everyone's saying, like, you remember how Khabib out there was saying, look, Ilia, if he comes up to 55, in a number one contender fight against like a Charles Oliveira, of course, then we give him an opportunity. And Khabib, credit to him, because he said that he thinks Ilia would beat Charles Oliveira, and I think Ilia would beat Charles Oliveira as well. But that, to me, sounds like before Ilia vacated the title, maybe he was using it as a little bit of a bargaining chip to try to get his way when he moves up to 55, knowing that the weight cut was getting difficult, knowing that he's trying to kind of catapult his career, move up to 55, fight some of the bigger names, all those kinds of things. This is a big deal, man, what's going on here, because I think that these pieces are starting to kind of form, and we can start to see what's going on behind the scenes when it comes to Islam's fights next, and also Ilia Topuria.
Dana would say Islam.
He would say for the belt.
He would say for the belt.
Yeah.
I think so as well, because you're undefeated.
Of course.
Yeah.
There's no way that I have to fight to the number one contender. I have to fight directly for the belt.
So that kind of backs up what I was saying before, man, and like why I was like, look, Charles Oliveira, of course it could be a number one contender fight, but hearing this from Ilia, if this is true, which I don't think that he would be lying about this confidence in knowing that he's fighting for a title is, in my opinion, like kind of what Schaub was saying and what we all kind of see here, that he was basically promised that he's fighting for championship gold in his next fight at 155 pounds. So if Islam stays at 55, then it sounds like we get the Topuria versus Islam fight. However, if Islam moves up to 170 pounds, then we get Ilia versus Charles for the vacant title. And what even gives this away even more is what Ilia Topuria is about to say here in just a second. Let's finish this segment, though.
How soon do you think that would happen?
Personally, I don't know. I hope in summer, maybe in September. I don't know. Whenever it happens, it's going to be.
How does it normally?
Okay, so hopefully we see Ilia Topuria before the end of the year. There's all these different things going on with the rights deals, and depending if it's going to be him versus Islam, they may wait to book that fight until the UFC has a new deal locked in. We've heard rumors it could be Netflix, all these different things. That's a massive fight, man. It's a massive fight, so I'll be interested to see if the UFC books that and where they go here. But this is where it gets very interesting. He talks about prepping for Islam/Charles, right? So we get the picture now, right? You get the picture that he's fighting Islam or Charles Oliveira next. That's what this sounds like to me. But what kind of gives away that it would basically essentially be for a vacant title to me, in my opinion, is what he's about to say right here.
Is your current training a regular training, or is your current training specific training targeted for your next fight being Islam? Like psychologically in your mind,
Yeah.
You're already there?
Yeah. I have two names in my mind right now, and we focus all trainings in two names. It's Charles and Islam.
Now, why would that be? He just said that there's no number one contender fight. If his next fight is for the belt. So if Islam and Topuria doesn't happen, it's because Islam would be moving up to 170 pounds, is what this kind of sounds like to me. And, just kind of listening to this and trying to put the pieces together, It sounds like Islam versus Ilia will happen if Islam does not move to 170 pounds. So it sounds like it's going to come down to a decision, because I don't think JDM beats Bilal. Maybe he does and shocks me. Don't think it happens. I think Bilal beats JDM at UFC 315, which then creates an interesting situation, because then it sounds like it is going to depend on what Islam decides to do next. Will he go up and fight his friend in Bilal? Or if JDM wins, obviously he will, go that route. So it sounds like this fight will happen depending on what move is next for Islam. And then if that doesn't happen, it will be Charles Oliveira versus Ilia Topuria for the vacant or maybe an interim lightweight title. So this is all very, very telling. Everyone's caught up in the clip that we're going to take a look at in just a second. This was important connecting of the dots here, because when I heard Schaub say this, I'm like, I never really kind of looked at it that way, right? I was just getting so caught up into the Islam versus Ilia fight, how massive that would be. And, I understand what a lot of folks are saying. They're like, look, Islam already gave Volk 2 chances, right? Ilia needs to show something in the featherweight division or in the lightweight division. And I see both sides of it. I'm just of the thought is like, I want to see the best versus the best. Islam is clearly the number 1 pound for pound fighter in the sport. I think Ilia Topuria is number 2, considering what he has done thus far. And they are they are 2 of the most skilled fighters that I think we've really ever seen, especially Islam. And what Topuria has been able to do, absolutely spectacular. And I'm a fan of both of these guys. I give the edge to Islam in the matchup, but Ilia is definitely very dangerous, and I think that it would be an awesome fight. I like that Ilia is talking, trying to build things up, but I think a lot of this is going to come down to if Islam decides to move up to welterweight. So let's finish this clip, and then we'll take a look at him saying that he's going to sub Islam.
In case if he says you're fighting Charles.
Yeah, in case that he says that I gotta fight Charles, I'm ready for that, because I'm doing a lot of we watching his fights.
Okay, so he talks about how he's kind of watching film, preparing. He's got 2 names. It's either going to be Islam or Oliveira next. And I've been saying for a while that I could see the Oliveira versus Ilia Topuria fight happening, but I thought that it would be a number 1 contender eliminator type of fight, right? But it sounds like this guy's fighting for a belt no matter what. And you might say, Jake, I don't think so. This your points, you're kind of going all over. But the fact that he gave up, I'm going back to Shawman, the pay-per-view points and how important that is, it sounds like he has a guarantee or a promise from the UFC that he's not going to miss out on that at lightweight in his next opportunity. He will be fighting for a belt. To me, it makes all the sense in the world. I think this is a very important details. But last but not least, let's listen to him talk about a fight with Islam Makahchev and saying that he would sub him. So let's go. That's why I'm saying the trash talk of Ilia. He understands how to get people talking. He understands how to kind of build these things up. And I think the UFC sees a big star in this guy, right? He speaks Spanish, he speaks English, and he's becoming a big star, man. And I think that this is, him versus Islam would be a massive fight. I think that the UFC is looking to go that route. But I feel like Islam moving up to 170 pounds could be next, depending on how UFC 315 plays out, obviously. But let's hear his thoughts on this here.
Me personally, I would ask him what's your favorite submission? Whatever, I don't know. Dark show. I'm gonna submit you with that.
The laugh of PBD, I wanted to leave that in there, the laugh there. But look, you can't say that this dude isn't confident, man. In Topuria, he's confident. He understands how to create a headline. He gets the marketing aspect of it. And I'm sure he actually believes this. I think that he's very confident in his skill set. And so far, he said, I'm going to knock out Volk. I'm going to knock out Holloway. And I sat up here and I was like, he's going to do that. This guy has the power. He's a very, very elite fighter. Now, him subbing Islam, right? I know he's confident and says that that's something he could do. I don't see that happening, right? Could he shock me with that? Of course. I think that Islam is a better grappler than Ilia, but also it's important to keep in mind, prior to getting to the UFC, Ilia was predominantly a grappler. He was subbing a lot of people. That was basically his main thing, was to grapple. And now that he's gotten to the UFC, he's became this elite boxer. So Ilia does have a good ground game. I still don't think it's as good as Islam Makahchev. I think that Islam's a big guy. I think that he has an advantage when it comes to the grappling. And Islam has very much improved on the feet. This is a badass fight if the UFC is able to put it together between Topuria and Islam. Like I said, I would lean toward Islam in that matchup. He has a little bit of a size advantage, I would say, for sure. He is super well-rounded. I think that he has an edge when it comes to the grappling. But the thing about Ilia, the guy is confident, he has momentum behind him, and he is someone that has absolute dynamite in his hands to where if he lands on anybody at 45, 55, and I got to see what it looks like at 55 first, but I think it could possibly even translate to 170 pounds. But I wanted to show you guys this because Brendan Schaub was on to something. I know a lot of us were kind of, speculating what could possibly be next. Something big is on the horizon for Ilia Topuria.